Hi, this is Bill Ringle, host of My Quest for the Best, where we meet business, thought, and community leaders to discuss issues relevant to entrepreneurial growth. Joining us today is Mark Levy. Mark Levy is founder of Levy Innovation, a positioning firm that helps consultants, authors, and other thought leaders increase their fees by up to 2,000%. Marshall Goldsmith, named by the London Times as one of the 50 most influential management thinkers in the world, says, "Mark helped me understand who I am, establish my brand, and communicate my brand to the world." David Meerman Scott, who authored the biggest-selling social media book ever written, calls Mark a positioning guru extraordinaire. And TED speaker Simon Sinek says, "Mark helped me find my why." Before devoting his work full-time to Levy Innovation, Mark served as Chief Marketing Officer at an Inc. 5000 experiential branding organization whose clients included the Bank of America, Samsung, Time Warner, TiVo, and Harvard and Stanford universities. Mark has written for the New York Times and has co-written or co-created 5 books. His latest book, Accidental Genius, Using Writing to Generate Your Best Ideas, Insight, and Content, has been published in 11 languages. Welcome, Mark.
Hi, Bill. Thanks a lot for having me.
It's a pleasure. Mark, tell me, what does a positioning expert do?
A positioning expert, and thank you for calling me an expert. I try not to call myself an expert, but a positioning consultant, which is what I usually call myself, is it's someone we find in a business the big, sexy idea of what that business should be about, the thing that people are going to talk about, the big differentiated point that's not commoditized, and then we bring that to the fore of the business so that it comes through loud and clear in what, in your business or in your speech or in your book, whatever it is. It's the big, sexy idea that you hang your hat on in your business.
Can you give me an example of what that means to take an idea from a business, a book, a presentation, and give it a big, sexy idea transformation?
So 8 years ago, a man called me named Bill Treasurer. And Bill said, "Mark, I'm a management consultant. I do leadership development and team building workshops. Unfortunately, 300,000 other consultants do exactly what it is I do. So when I go into an organization trying to win that organization's business, I always go in hat in hand, kind of hanging my head, because I have no real way of standing out from those other 300,000 consultants. And even when I win the organization's business, and I occasionally win their business, they always get me way, way down on price because I have no way of holding on to any value I had established in their eyes. A top week for me, a week I absolutely prayed for, Bill said, was $1,800 a week. So he said, "I can't keep going on that way. I need your help." So Bill hired me. I interviewed Bill, I interviewed his clients, I interviewed his colleagues, and I discovered something very interesting. Bill Treasurer, before he was a management consultant, was a professional high diver in theme parks. He would climb up a 9-story high radio tower. That's a ladder, Bill, 9 stories high, standing by itself. When he got up to the top of the 9-story ladder, he'd spray his body with gasoline, he would light himself on fire, and he would dive 9 stories into water. Over the course of 10 years, he did that act 1,500 times. He was so good at being Captain Inferno. At the theme park he worked for, named him the captain of an entire team of Captain Infernos that went up and down the East Coast performing that gig. But the most interesting thing about Bill Treasurer, he was and still is afraid of heights. So I took the idea that Bill did what he had to do despite his fear, and I married it to the fact he does leadership development and team building workshops. And we made his company Giant Leap Consulting. They build courage in organizations. They help leaders and their employees take the risks they know they should be taking but aren't. So all of Bill's workshops, all of his keynotes, all of his consulting, all of his materials started to revolve around ways of driving fear out of the workplace so that people could take the most significant risks they had to achieve their top goals. So what happened for Bill's business, because we changed him from being a management and leadership consultant only into being a courage builder, right? Somebody comes in and teaches you how to create courage and operate from a point of courage in your organization. I told you he used to make $1,800, like that was a week he used to pray for. He's now had several months of $100,000 months. He's booked months in advance. He's a top keynote guy, and his latest book came out from Barrett Kohler. The title's called Courage Goes to Work. You know, just everything now revolves around that idea of courage. Yes, he still does leadership and team building, but it's all in ways of building courage in the organization to tackle those problems, right? So it was just a huge change for him by going to that. So that would be an idea.
So it's clear that your work helps transform an individual consultant, a firm, and helps them really position themselves effectively. How did you get started in business yourself? Did you always know that you wanted to do this kind of work?
Yeah, I had actually, great question. I had no idea that my field even existed. So I left school with a writing degree, and I worked in the book and publishing field and was a writer for many, many years. And as a matter of fact, I worked in publishing, I worked in bookstore chain, and then I started to work in sales for a very large book wholesaler. And I became a director of special projects for this very large book wholesaler. And we used to buy millions of dollars worth of books from the major publishers like Random House and Simon & Schuster and Doubleday, and then we'd have to sell them to, Barnes & Noble and Borders and independent bookshops and later Amazon. And the interesting thing in the field that I came from is that the books I had were identical to the books my competitors had, which were identical, by the way, to the books my customers had, right? The new Stephen King novel was the same for me and my competitors and for my clients. I wasn't surprised that that book was coming out. So I had to learn very quickly how to take a seemingly commoditized product, that seemingly everyone had the identical product, and I had to find ways of making my product stand out from other people's products, right? So I ended up leading a sales staff where we helped sell over $1 billion worth of product, and I was 3 times nominated for Publishers Weekly Sales Rep of the Year Award. So with all those ideas, thousands of times in a year, I'd have to pick up a book and say, is this book worth selling? What's the story behind this book? And how is it differentiated from other books out there? And I just learned to do that. I did this for 14 years over and over and over again. So after I was successful in the book field, I just kind of took that knowledge of how to sum up what the story was behind something and whether it should be sold or not and how to sell it, and then apply it to people's businesses or their books or their speeches. So it's like, here's your compelling idea, and here's how you go to market with it.
Mark, that's really interesting. Do you remember, I know that you've been thinking about this for so long, and as you were doing this with the books, do you remember the first time that it really caught and you noticed a dramatic difference because of the positioning that you had employed that allowed a book to catapult to the top?
It's interesting. Gee, that was so long ago. I'm trying to. Well, I do remember. I don't know if this is a terribly interesting story, but I remember when I first joined the sales staff. And I was a bottom member of the sales staff at that point. And I remember seeing that a book was, I was just basically an order taker. Like I would passively accept the orders from customers who would be calling me up on the phone. And I remember the first time I spotted a trend in a particular book that was selling. I was passively taking in all this information, but I was taking it in from like a lot of different clients. And I thought, oh, here's a book that's selling, but it's not on the bestseller list yet or anything like that. And so I remember I decided to make a gutsy call, and I called a bookstore that we weren't dealing with, but it was a very prominent bookstore. And I said to them, I see this book selling, and would you like some? I still have some in stock. I'm about to run out of it. And the customer, I still remember what they said. They said, okay, send me 30 copies, but if it doesn't sell, I'm going to have your hide. That's what they said to me. And fortunately, the book did sell. They sold out of all their copies, and they became my biggest client. And so it was this idea of just seeing what was out there, the trend, and then just having the guts to use this kind of idea to try to win more business. So I don't know if that's a terribly inspiring story, but I do remember that that's how it started a very long time ago.
Well, Mark, what's terrific about that is that you remember the risk that you took and that it was actually on the line. No people care about risks where there are actual consequences to it, and that was one where somebody was going to be upset if your prediction and your advice had turned out to not carry the weight that you had put behind it. So
right.
Now that
I would have alienated that, exactly.
Yeah, so that was terrific. When you moved from a publishing position and in sales and actually decided to go out on your own, how did you make the decision to go out on your own from having a very successful job in publishing?
I had been a writer, and I had written books, and I remember that someone hired me to write a book with him, and so from that, that gave me the courage to jettison this career I had been doing for 14 plus years and go out because I had one client. And so from that basis, I left to do that co-writing, but at the same time set up my positioning business as well. So I didn't leave my work to go to nothing. I had one big client, and I just used that as a starting point.
And then what did you do, because that was a co-writing a book, and that was a significant project. What did you do next to build your business?
I started to attend conferences, and I started to speak at conferences about this idea of how to differentiate and how to talk clearly and engagingly about your point of differentiation. And I just had people contact me from that. So it was often that they needed to come up with their differentiation in their business, but they also at times wanted coaching on how to write books around their point of differentiation. So it was both those things working simultaneously. What's your big idea, and now how do you write and speak about your big idea?
As you consult with some of the thought leaders around the country and probably internationally, what are some of the mistakes that are so obvious to you that many people who really are at the top of their field, you've worked with Simon Sinek, you've worked with Marshall Goldsmith, you've worked with people who are well-known in their field and industry leaders, yet you're able to identify things that are not obvious to them. What are some of those common obstacles or blind spots that you are able to point out and add value to their business?
Well, when people come to me, they think they want to be differentiated. They think that they want to stand out, but they don't really. So in order to stand out, you have to be, for one thing, you have to have a very specific message, but it also has to be for a relatively specific audience. And so people are often scared to choose who it is that they're speaking to, because what you say to one audience might not be of interest to another audience. So people, they often, when they first get to me, they often want to talk about something that's safe and amorphous and all-encompassing, that everyone who even potentially could be a client of theirs would want to sign up for that message. And it's just very, very hard to do that. You kind of have to get behind an idea first. You have to talk to an audience in such a clear way about their problems and their vision and their worldview. And you have to talk about it with such precision that you can't use the same language or the same ideas for everyone that you're speaking to. It's just not going to resonate for all kinds of audiences, right? Because people have different kinds of ideas about life, right? So that's often a very sore point people in the very beginning. That's going to have to pick a specific audience.
They're not thrilled with the idea that you're telling them to do something that seems riskier by narrowing their message and narrowing their audience. What's the resistance that many people have behind that?
That's right. You're going to be bigger by talking to a more narrowed audience and having an idea that's more narrowed. That's exactly right. That you're going to be more popular and you're going to get more business from doing that. And it seems counterintuitive. But again, because you can't reach everyone, you don't have the budget, it would require different messages, all kinds of stuff like that. You just have to be accepting that the way to success is to narrow rather than to expand.
Do you have an example of someone you've worked with that you could help share with us how that process works in order to help somebody focus on an area where they can really zero in and laser target exactly the problem and the group that will most benefit from their services?
Right. Well, one of my clients, Lisa Earl McLeod, when she and I started together, she largely did sales training. Now, there's a huge, huge market for sales training. But really, when you speak to Lisa, she's absolutely brilliant, and she's an amazing storyteller, and she's really speaking to the sales leadership. So rather than being sales training, she became a sales leadership consultant. And rather than training people on every possible sales technique that there is, which, by the way, Lisa's very capable at it. She's worked for decades doing this stuff. She knows every technique there is. It's just that Lisa is she knows what works, and she's also extremely ethical, and she also is very much concerned about the field of sales in general. And at one point in talking to her, she talked about elevating the concept of salespeople in the marketplace's eyes, right? That selling is a noble profession. So we made Lisa's big idea selling with noble purpose, right? So she became not just a sales trainer, but a sales leadership consultant, and she helped organizations find their noble selling purpose, or their NSP, which is the reason how their product is helping their customer in ways that go beyond just, like making money off the customer. And she did all kinds of studies around that concept. So that was that idea of helping her, rather than being about everything, we helped her narrow about the thing that she truly is. She's the spirited, ethical person, and she wrote this book, Selling with Noble Purpose, which became a #2 bestseller on 800 CEO Reads. So that would be an example of saying you have to get narrower in order to get bigger, right? You can't be about every technique there. You can't be about every idea out there. You have to be reduce it down to a specificity that the right audience will find valuable. It reminds me of what
Mark, let me jump in.
Hmm?
Hold that thought. What I want to just emphasize is that in the example with Lisa, instead of speaking to maybe 300,000 sales managers and directors of sales and companies that could hire her, she had to narrow her focus down to maybe several thousand vice presidents of sales. So she's targeting a different group, which is a smaller audience, and with a more focused message. And I imagine that it probably helped expand her business by taking that shift.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Again, it seems counterintuitive. Sometimes it seems like if you go to the smaller audience, your business is going to suffer. And I'm not saying in a knee-jerk way that you need to find like a very small group. I'm not saying that at all. But I'm just saying if you're shooting for a big amorphous group, it may pay dividends to see what your most important, most honest thought could be, and then who, in a subgroup within that large group, like who's the best of the best? Who's that really going to appeal to? It reminds me of what Jerry Garcia said, and I'm paraphrasing, I don't remember the exact quote, but Jerry Garcia said something like, the Grateful Dead is like licorice. Now, some people out there hate licorice. They detest licorice. But the people who love licorice really love licorice. So you find the people who really love licorice, and you give them licorice, right? And so you might say, if you're manufacturing licorice, you might, it might be like, wow, we should be selling licorice to the entire world. But the entire world doesn't love licorice. People, so now you're going to be wasting your time. You need to find the licorice lovers and sell them your licorice and show them how your licorice is better than an average form of licorice, but it's still a licorice, and you're going to love this as a licorice lover. That's what you need to do in your business.
With finding people's sexy ideas, what is the most important aspect of that from your perspective in order to help somebody find their big sexy idea?
I would say that there's a bunch of different ways to approach it. So one way to approach it is it's probably not something that you're currently saying exactly to your customer, right? That's what I normally find. That if you knew what your big sexy idea was, when people come to me, when they hire me, if they knew what their big sexy idea was, they would already be using it, and they would have no reason to be hiring me. So I instantly assume that what it is they're directly saying is not working to the extent that it should be. So what I need to do when I'm working with them, I question them from such a variety of angles that I am trying to get them to forget their default ways of answering questions. It's like, what is the stuff that you always tell your customers, but I try to take kind of backdoor routes to get them to a more honest place. Because often what it is that they're telling customers is kind of tainted with all kinds of sales jargon, and they've tried to remove the rough edges, and they're trying to give people exactly what it is they want, and they're often giving me very commoditized thinking in doing that. So I have to shake them loose from that. So I use various techniques to get them to go to a kind of more honest level. So, for instance, I'll give you an example of what that sounds like. One question that I'll commonly ask people to tell me about or to write about, I'll say, suppose someone from a prominent magazine, like let's say Fast Company, suppose they were following you around for a week. Well, let's say it wasn't someone from Fast Company. Let's say it was someone who you were mentoring, and you were thinking of actually passing the business on to them, and you really wanted to see them succeed, that you really loved this person, and you thought they had, they were really someone you wanted to help in the world. If they followed you around for a week, what is it exactly that you would tell them as they were following you around? I mean, what would you say to them in your day-to-day business about the stuff that it is you are doing, about, your products, about your services, about how you conduct business? What are the things you'd say to them, and like in a real honest way, and what are the things they'd see you doing, maybe that you weren't even saying to them, but what would they notice in their notes? So that would be an example of getting people off their mere sales jargon and on to what's truly important.
That's right, because your question actually forces them to think about what they do that may be something that they're not talking about explicitly to their customers or their market.
Right. That's right. Or they're talking about it to their market, and they're putting all this veneer and lacquer over it. And, they're saying things like, my service is remarkable. They're using these big highfalutin words, these abstract generalizations, and I'll say to them, look, I believe your service is remarkable, and you can use the word remarkable, but why do you say it's remarkable? Like, what would I see if I watched you delivering this remarkable service, right? Like, let's get rid of the hyperbole for a second. What would I actually see you doing? And what would I see you saying? And what would other people see you doing and saying as you were executing upon the service? Ah, got it. So now when they're telling me about the facts behind the delivery of this remarkable service, often those facts are far more compelling than using the word remarkable. So that would be an example of me like trying to get them off their default commoditized, generalized way of thinking. That's why when people ask me what it is I do, I say consultants and other thought leaders hire me to increase their fees by up to 2,000%. That's not marketing hyperbole. For a bunch of my clients, not all my clients, but for many of them, let's see, I'm just thinking aloud. One went from charging $1,000 an hour to charging $20,000 an hour. One went from charging $3,000 a day to charging $25,000 a day. One went from charging $300 an hour to $25,000 a day. One went, you know what I mean? One went from $5,000 a year to $875,000 a year. So again, I don't guarantee that with all my clients, but what I was doing was I was just looking over the benefits that it created for clients, and then I didn't want to scream and use hyperbole and say what I do is remarkable. I just want to say, no, I do this. This is factually a promise. You know, one of the things that I don't guarantee, but that happens often with clients. So everyone in their business has that kind of thing. It's like show me what it is without hysteria, what you say and what you do, and I bet you something really cool is buried within there.
It's true, because when you give that elevator pitch, when you talk about that to prospects and others, you can say that you've helped clients and increase their fees by up to 2,000%. That's right. Easy for others to say, but no one else can back that up with the examples that you can. Right.
And again, it's not a guarantee because, you know, it doesn't work for everyone. But right, that up to 2,000%, I can point to. I didn't come up with a claim and find ways of justifying it. I looked over dispassionately. Right, keyword. I dispassionately looked over my business, and I said, what are all the ways I'm helping customers? Like, and I wasn't trying to be salesy. I was just saying, like, what is it that I'm doing for customers? What's the features of my service? And then what are the benefits they enjoyed? And then when I looked over a bunch of stuff, I said, oh, wow, look this guy raised his fees. Oh, and this guy raised his fees, and this woman raised her fees, and this woman you know what I mean? And I just kind of dispassionately, the way a journalist would do it, said, okay, so I'm going to use this.
Now, you've also taken your love and skill with writing and produced Accidental Genius, using writing to generate your best ideas, insight, and content. That book's been very successful, and you've, of course, used your positioning to promote the book and make it, a very successful book. How has that book helped your career in your consulting profession?
Yeah, so Accidental Genius has been out in 2 editions. It first came out in the year 2000, and Barrett Kohler, the publisher, came out. I updated it. I put in 40% new material, and came out 2010. And by the way, the reason why we did that is because it's a book on how to use free writing, how to use this, free as in free from the normal rules of writing. It's using writing as a thinking and creativity technique in order to get at your best thought, so that, you kind of take off the limits of your thinking, and it allows you to think in a freer way. So when we came out with that book in 2000, it sold very well. But they wanted to update it in 2010, and the audience had changed so dramatically in those 10 years, because in the year 2000, very few business people had to use writing as part of their business skills. In the year 2010, virtually everyone, or like 70, 80% of the world, business people, you have to use writing in what it is you're doing. So that was the big update. It was the idea of using this free writing concept that helps you get at your best thinking and your best ideas, using it just as a means of ideation in the year 2000 to in the year 2010. It's ideation and then using it to generate content as well. So from that stuff, it's been translated in 10 languages, and it was, for the publisher at least, it's been a minor bestseller. So it's just gotten me lots of entree in places that I would not have gotten into. People come to me, and they will often send me very complimentary emails or things like that, and then they'll be asking about how they can use these ideas in their business, they'll come to my website. And even though the book itself is not necessarily about positioning, they'll see that I position, and it's a natural outgrowth of it to, hiring me to position them. Right? So it makes it's I can't be everywhere in the world, but the book gets to places in the world that I won't know about, and then it acts as an emissary for me, the book, and so then the people contact me based on the book.
And Mark, of all the things that you do with helping clients and working with companies, you're very busy. What are one or two of the techniques that you've developed to stay on track and productive day to day that others listening to this could emulate and adopt into their own business practices and find ways to improve their productivity or maybe their team's productivity?
Sure. Well, one thing that I do many mornings, I won't say every morning, but when is I use this free writing technique first thing in the morning to think about what's going to happen during the day. So what it would look like is I open up a Word document, an empty Word document, and I look to see what's on my schedule. And I just start to free write. Okay, I need to speak today to Bill, to Kevin. I start free writing. I start writing I write without stopping for about 15 or 20 minutes. And this is writing I'm not going to be sharing with anyone, right? So I feel free to think aloud onto the paper, to curse, to do whatever it is. This is purely as a means of watching myself think. So I write a little faster than I normally do because, as Ray Bradbury says, in quickness there is truth. So I start talking to myself, saying on paper, saying, okay, today is Tuesday, and I have 5 appointments scheduled, and those 5 people are blah, 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 blah. Okay, so let me think about each one in turn. And then I think about what each appointment is and where we are in the process and what do I need to do to help the client. What do I need to say? Or let's say I was trying to, let's say do a pitch to someone. I'll talk to myself about what the pitch is going to be. So basically, I'm kind of pre-living the day for 10 or 15 or 20 minutes on paper, and I'm asking myself questions about what it is I should do. So now at the end of that 10 or 15 or 20 minutes when I've done the free writing, I can hit save if I want to, but often I'll just close out the document without even saving it because the benefit was just in thinking aloud onto the paper, right? So now as I go into the day, I can hit the ground running in my various appointments. I kind of know what it is I want to say, or at least where I want to start, what the main ideas are. So that's one way that it allows me to save time and to be more productive in the day, doing that writing so that I hit the day knowing what might be happening. So that's one thing. Does that make sense, Bill?
It does. It does. And Mark,
yeah.
2 or 3 sources that you read on a regular basis to stimulate your own ideas, maybe magazines, maybe online sources that you use to help stimulate your own ideas and keep your thinking fresh.
Yeah, well, right. That's a great question because also, it's a key point. I tell people it's very hard to create in a vacuum. So for instance, I teach people how to write. And often people will come to me and occasionally they'll want to write, let's say, fiction. They'll want to write, let's say, a science fiction novel. And I'll say, who are your favorite science fiction writers? And they'll say, well, I don't really read science fiction. I just want to write. I have an idea for a science fiction novel. And I said, there's no way, or it's very unlikely you're going to be able to write your science fiction novel if you're not steeped in that genre, because there's certain conventions that have been established in that genre by great science fiction writers who went ahead of you. So how do you know that your idea is fresh? How do you know how to execute upon it? So you kind of need to be read in your field in order to stand on the shoulders of giants ahead of you. You know what I mean? To see what it is that they've seen and then pay homage to them in your writing or to refute their writing in your writing, whatever it is. But you kind of need to be immersed in that field. So I would say in what it is, so it's very important in order to be creative in whatever it is you're doing to be immersed in that field. in order to do it. So some of the things, I read a lot of the, Harvard Business School. I read a lot of the blogs there. And, pardon me, I also, interestingly enough, that you may know this about me, Bill, I'm a huge sports fan. So what I will often do, I read a lot of sports blogs, I read a lot of baseball blogs, but one of the things I do is sports writers have, they need to write about a lot in a daily way, and so they often use really interesting formats to their blogs. They'll often do a bunch of interesting ways of formatting their individual blog posts that I don't often see elsewhere. So not only do I read sports blogs for the material itself, but I'll also look at the blog posts in a meta way to see how these writers are writing about, let's say, 18 games that happened yesterday. But how are they keeping it interesting? Like, Are they theming it around a single idea? Are they using it as a top 10 list? Like, what are they doing to get all these interesting ideas out there in a single blog post? So I read both for content and I read for formats that the various writers use. And I'll also read within my field and outside of my field to see how people, because I don't want to be stuck in a single paradigm, because sometimes people within your field, they just write in one certain way. So I'm always reading social science, or I'm always reading sports, or I'm always reading philosophy, not just for the content, but to see how they approach their subjects.
Mark, you've shown us an example of how you bring your nimble thinking to a variety of fields as a positioning expert. You've shared with us great ideas about examples with clients such as Bill Treasurer, such as Lisa McLeod, with taking their businesses and transforming them through effective positioning. You've shared with us ideas about how you get people to come to you by promoting your thought leadership out in the marketplace and helping others to communicate what makes them special as well as how to do it effectively. You've shared with us the idea of how Jerry Garcia talks about licorice and the Grateful Dead and how people can adopt that idea in order to make their own businesses more effective and make that transition more comfortable so that they target a narrower audience and become more effective. You've encouraged people to think about the mentoring perspective so that they too can focus on what are the most important aspects of what they do in their business in order to achieve results that strips away some of that hyperbole that often clogs the channel of communication. And you've talked about how you use free writing in your own life day in and day out in order to clarify your thinking and help you be effective in helping the myriad of clients who come to you for help with their businesses. So, Mark, for all of these reasons and so much more, thank you for joining me today on My Quest for the Best.
Bill, thank you so much for having me, and thanks everyone for listening. And that was a beautiful wrap-up, so I appreciate that, you telling me ideas back. Thank you so much.